coaster we're going to be making tonight. If you are just joining us, welcome in. I'm Treasure Got Gems. So, let's make it. First, let's take off this protective film. Let's get the story started. The story is long. Like it's a couple. It's like a lot.
101 True Scary Stories to Read in Bed Tonight.
Let's do
by
it.
Lane Loomis.
We're gonna start with one.
Narrated by Terry Schnaubelt and Matt Godfrey. Introduction. We've all heard the story of the call that comes from inside the house, the killer with a hook for a hand, and the vishing hitchhiker. We've heard of ghosts and ghouls and seen elaborate Hollywood depictions of zombies. They fill us with the kind of fear that dries up the next morning. Lasting fear is another entity.
Welcome
There are other things that frighten us every time we find ourselves uneasy in the dark. Everyone's imagination goes somewhere when they see a shadow that might be out of place. A childhood memory or something they heard in passing from a friend. The kind of horror that sticks with us are the things
I hope
we
you guys
know
can hear
are
okay.
real. What we worry may befall us in a dark room in the
I
seconds
don't need a
before we
lot
turn
of
on
use.
light. There's a reason the great tradition of a campfire is to tell scary stories around it. We need a way not only to entertain us, but to pass on the stories that mean something, the ones that hint at an unsettling thought. Not everything in this world is as it seems. This book is a collection of short, scary stories told from the perspective of the person who experienced them. These are real people's accounts of the creepy, the occult, of their near misses with madmen and paranormal entities. Each chapter is short, standalone campfire tale, a retelling of a frightening or gruesome incident that has stuck with the teller. They are all the more terrifying because they are real. Listen with caution. 1. Peeping Tom.
Oh, I don't want this
In
one.
high school, I was obsessed with movies and
Hold
wanted to
on.
be a director when I grew up.
I don't want to
My
hear
parents saved up and bought me a
That's
camcorder,
just
and
scary,
I spent
wait.
money for my after-school job at a restaurant.
Oh, that one's
buying
scary
tapes
too.
and
That one's better. Okay, we can't get too
3.
scared, you guys.
Message on the mirror. I was babysitting for a new family in town one night. After the couple left, the kids were playing in the living room, and I went upstairs to use the bathroom. I turned the light on and saw a message scrawled across the mirror in red lipstick.
Okay, we are about to get started.
Tonight is the
Welcome in
night
if you're
evil
just joining
begins.
us. Make
I
sure you
freaked out
click
and made the
that
kids
little
go in
banner
their
where it
bedroom so I
says
could
check out
lock
the
door.
shop
I called
so
my
that you
mom,
can
and she
see
came
what
over
I
and
have
stayed with me until the
available.
couple returned.
Right now I'm
They
making a
seemed bewildered by the
cute,
message on the
sparkly,
mirror
spooky
and claimed they
set.
had no idea how it got there. They were persistent in trying to hire me for the next few months, but I never babysat for them again. I heard something similar happen to the next babysitter they managed to hire.
What?
The body in the road.
What?
I've heard of things like this happening, but I thought it was an urban legend. In college, I used to go home on the weekends to do laundry and eat free food and hang out with my family and high school friends. I was a night owl, so I'd stay as long as possible and then drive the 3 hours back to school in the middle of the night. This is in Nebraska, so even when it isn't the dead of night,
Oh my gosh,
it's easy to
Nebraska
find
is
yourself
scary.
totally alone on the road.
I've been there a lot.
One Sunday night, I was driving back to school, and it was around 4 a.m. I wasn't too far out of my small town toward the city, and as usual, the roads were completely deserted. Up ahead, I saw what looked like an accident. There was a car pulled halfway off the road onto the shoulder, and I saw a body.
Make sure
in
you
the
click
middle
the
of the
cart
road.
right here.
Needless to say, I was extremely
So you can see
creeped
all
out.
of the cool things that
But
I
I
have
also had these
available in
feelings
the
of
shop.
wanting to stop and help if someone was hurt and needed medical attention. Eventually, my rational side won out, and I decided to drive around the accident and then call 911 after I made it around and was on my way. I'm a small guy, and something about the situation didn't seem right to me. Or perhaps I was just too scared to stop and get out of my car in the dark to investigate. I drove on the shoulder on the opposite side of the road, clear from the other car and the body on the road. When I was about 10 yards past the accident, I looked in my rearview mirror, ready to pick up my phone and call the police, when I saw a handful of people coming up from the ditch where they'd been hiding behind the
Ooh,
car
it's gonna
on the
be
shoulder.
cute. It's gonna be
Body in the
cute.
road.
Welcome in if
Was
you're
now
just joining
standing up,
us. Make sure you
watching me
click the
drive
card
away.
to see all the cute products that I have available in the shop.
5. He could see me.
Let's do 2.
I was trying to make friends in my new city, so I went to a party a coworker invited me to. I ended up having too much to drink because I was trying to calm my nerves and have fun with strangers. Uber wasn't a thing yet, so I decided I'd just sleep it off in my car and drive home in the morning. I woke up in the dead of the night.
Darn.
The city street was so eerie. It had been well populated around bar close when I passed out, but now it was deserted. I could just see by the light of some street lights and the glow of the moon. I wondered for a minute what had woken me up, before I heard a scratching noise on the passenger side rear window. I'll never forget the look on the guy's face who was crouched outside my car, staring at me and trying to get my attention. When he saw me, he grinned and pressed his open mouth against the glass,
Oh my gosh.
and then made a chomping motion with his teeth
I'm driving
and
away.
giggled wildly. The worst part was there was nothing I could do.
Why?
I knew I didn't want to risk driving drunk, but I didn't want to get out of the car and run away either. In the end, I took my jacket off and put it over my face and just tried to go back to sleep knowing he was still out there.
Oh no.
I heard him walking around the car, tapping at the glass for what felt like hours, as I hid in plain sight and prayed for him to go away. 6. The night we didn't come home. A few years ago, I had a shitty job where I was forced
he
to work
does.
third shift, nights, while my wife was working a normal day job.
Okay.
On the day my sister-in-law went into labor, my wife drove to the hospital after she was done with work and spent the night there.
Okay.
I arrived home early the next morning and entered the house to find the electricity wasn't working.
Oh no.
After
Good
searching
morning.
the house, I realized someone had broken in through a basement window
So they
and
turned
cut
off your
power
power
to the
line.
house through the circuit breaker down there.
That's ridiculous.
Nothing was taken from the home, and the window in question was not visible from the front of the house. Slowly, it dawned on me
What?
that someone had been watching us.
Oh no.
They knew there was a window of time between when I left for work for the night and when my wife returned home,
I cannot.
and that she'd be there alone for hours.
Your wife? Oh my god.
7. The man at the door.
Oh no.
I
I'm
grew up
scared.
in a small suburb about an hour from a mid-sized city. I always felt totally safe everywhere.
The
It was just a
changes.
normal,
This is
idyllic
scary.
place, and I lived in a newish neighborhood with my family in a split-level house.
Okay.
Our dining room was upstairs, but because of the open design, you could still see the floor below it as well as the foyer and our front door. One night,
That's
while we were
cute.
eating dinner, a man came to the door, and I went to answer it.
Don't answer
He
it.
said he was lost and needed directions.
Oh my
And kept
God.
looking between me
The
and the rest of
ring.
my family he could see upstairs.
I don't like
Describe
the ring is the
terror
best thing
I felt
invented.
fill my body when I was
No
talking to him.
advertisement,
I've
but
never
advertisement
experienced
for
fear
real.
like this.
What?
His request was weird. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood you'd get lost or
answering
need
doors.
directions in. But nothing about him should have been so unsettling. I gave him directions, and he
Oh, you knew
left.
directions?
I
girl?
deadbolted the door and ran up the stairs and felt afraid for the rest of the night.
Stupid.
It was just a feeling I got. A feeling that if my family hadn't been at home and visible from the front door, that I wouldn't be here today.
So why'd you answer it?
I've never gotten a vibe like that from someone before that or since then.
Oh my
It's been
god.
10 years.
Good job.
I'm still waiting for the day his face shows up on the news
Oh, girl.
as a kidnapper or something.
She's stressed.
8.
No
The
judgment.
people in the field.
She was stressed.
I'm a big guy, so not a lot scares me. I used to be in the habit of walking in the middle of the night when I had insomnia.
Oh
I
no.
hated lying in bed waiting to fall asleep.
It's okay.
So instead of tossing and turning, I'd get up and walk around my neighborhood for an hour, and then I'd fall back into bed, dead tired, and sleep. One night, I'd taken an even longer walk than usual, convinced that returning home anything less than completely exhausted would be a waste. I found myself on the deserted grounds of the town's high school soccer fields. The school
What?
on one side and woods
So
on
you
the
was
other.
on a walk.
I decided to cut through the field to the street that would eventually take me home.
Should have rode your bike.
About halfway through the field, I saw something in the near darkness towards the
See,
very edge.
walking and biking is better.
Half a
Biking
dozen
is better.
shadows emerged from the forest.
You
It
deserve.
started walking toward me, slowly but steadily. I shouted out a hello to them.
So I'm making a
No
cute
one
coaster.
responded.
I'm gonna show you guys what it
They
looks
just
like in
kept
just a
walking
moment.
towards me. I turned around and saw that
What we got
behind
going
me,
on with
a
it.
similar group of people had come from the woods and started to spread out in a kind of semicircle around me. I turned around again and booked it toward the school. I'm lucky I was in shape from all those nighttime walks. I have no idea who those people were or what they would have done if I hadn't been able to get away.
That's okay.
That was the last night I took an insomnia walk.
What? Boy, you can go
9.
walk again.
The Watcher.
That was not scary.
When I was in high school, I used to babysit for this family a few blocks over.
Great.
The dad ran a business out of the home, so one of my duties while I was babysitting was to make sure I answered the phone so I could take a message in case it was one of his clients calling. After a few months, I started getting creepy calls.
What?
The man on the line would say awful things to me.
It was
He
him.
talked in a whisper and would
See?
describe what I was wearing. He said he was my watcher, and that he was always watching me, even though I only got the calls when I was babysitting.
It was.
I eventually stopped complaining about the calls to the family because I could tell it annoyed them, and I couldn't lose the babysitting job. Besides, the dad always gave me a ride the 3 blocks back to my
It
home,
was the.
so it wasn't like I had to be out.
Who was
late
it, you
after getting the
guys?
calls.
Like, who
At the
was
end of the
it?
school year, I moved a town over to live with my aunt and started attending a community college that summer. Because of the move, I never babysat for the family again. I forgot about the calls until a few years later when I saw the dad of the kids I was babysitting in the paper. He'd been accused of stalking and sexually assaulting a teenage girl who worked for his family. I don't have any proof, but seeing the way he smiled in that photo clicked things into place for me. I believe he was the watcher calling me all those times.
That's who I thought it was.
And I think something bad would have happened if I kept babysitting for that family.
Girl.
10. Selfies from hell.
What? This is so
My older
scary.
sister has a story about camping by herself in the 90s. She spent a summer as a backpacking guide in the Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota and decided to spend a week on a solo backpack before heading home in the fall.
No.
She said it was a perfectly normal trip, just like the ones she had been taking all summer in the same area.
Girl's
She
different.
never had a bad feeling
I'm
or
scared.
anything,
Wait.
except she had brought along a disposable camera to document the trip and have pictures to show family back home.
Oh my god.
There was a little dial at the top that showed how many pictures you had left before you used all the film.
Mm-hmm.
She said that there were a few times she swore she was keeping track of the count correctly so she could get photos of all her favorite places along the way. But when she would look, she had fewer shots left than she expected.
What?
She finished the trip and packed her stuff up and came home. Eventually, she brought the disposable camera in to get the film developed. When she got the photos back, there were the pictures she had taken of the lakes and woods, along with photos taken of a nude man in a ski mask.
What?
They were crude selfies before selfies were a thing, and they were interspersed throughout the rest of the photos she had taken,
Where was
meaning the person in the photos had followed her on multiple days,
what?
seemingly for no reason other than to take creepy photos of himself with her camera.
That's terrifying. You better know
11.
something.
What I heard when I pressed
That's
pause.
crazy.
I was taking the bus home late at night. It's
Okay.
always empty and full of
Really?
crazies, but I got used to
The
it.
bus at night.
I usually just sat
Hey
down
everyone,
and
if
put
you're
my
just
headphones
joining
on
us,
and listened
I'm
to
making
music
super
until I
cute
got home.
sparkly
One
coasters.
night, a man sat next to me.
This is the
which
one
thought
that I
was
made
strange,
last
since
night.
There were many
Super,
open
super,
seats
super
where he could
cute.
sit by himself.
I'm making another
But
one
again,
tonight.
the bus at that time was
This
usually
one?
full of strange people. I ignored him and focused my
It's
attention
coming
out the
along
window.
great.
Eventually, I became aware that this man was mumbling something to himself. I discreetly paused my music and tried to make out what he was saying. It turns out, I'd been sitting there quietly for a good 15 minutes, while this man sat next to me talking to himself about how he should stab this woman and
What the-
show her what he can do. I was terrified, but I felt like I couldn't move or alert him in any way. I didn't know if he would get angry or aggressive if I tried to get up, so I was forced to sit there
Girl.
quietly listening to him until 10
You
minutes
better
later
get
when he
brave.
finally got up and got off the bus.
She better get brave.
12. She didn't tell me someone died there. One summer during college, I took a job as a counselor at a Girl Scout camp. I was in charge of a cabin full of girls that would change from week to week as new campers came in, but I stayed in the small cabin all summer. As time went on, I noticed weird stuff happening. Girls complained of nightmares, which I thought was normal, except that all the girls seemed to be having the same nightmares. They all talked of a mean old man who had a scar on his face and
What?
chased them through the camp up to the cabin where they locked themselves inside while he banged on the doors and windows.
Oh no.
There were other strange things too.
What happened?
Returning to the cabin to discover the lights on while we'd all made
Scary.
sure it was off before we left as a group for dinner or an evening activity.
That's so scary.
Meals were mandatory and activities were camp-wide. No one should have been off on their own to turn the lights
This is
on
coming
once we'd
along
left the
so
cabin for the evening.
beautiful.
I also noticed that any food or water bottles I had in the cabin tended to disappear. At first, I blamed the girls because they weren't allowed to have food of their own, so I thought maybe they were looking through my bags to steal the candy bars
Girl,
I'd stored
why
there
you
for a
gonna
little
think
pick-me-up. But again, like with the lights, there just wasn't any reasonable time in which anyone would be alone
When
long
you hear
enough
these
in the
stories,
cabin
it's so
for them to go
interesting.
through my bag unnoticed. At the end of the summer, the girls had gone home, and the staff spent a tiring weekend packing the camp up and cleaning everything from top to bottom. On our last night, we were having a big bonfire and socializing and generally having a great time saying goodbye to each other.
That's good.
As I was getting ready to return to my cabin for one last night of sleep, the camp director came up to me and asked in a kind of strange way
What?
how the summer had been. I told her the campers were exhausting at times, but that I really enjoyed the work and I hoped to be back next summer. She pried a bit more, and eventually I realized she was asking if I'd noticed anything strange about the cabin. It turns out that while the camp was closed up for the winter, a homeless man had broken into this particular cabin
Oh my
and
God.
evidently spent a few weeks there before the owner of the camp discovered his body there at the beginning of spring.
Oh my God.
The camp director even
It's
came with me
ridiculous.
back to the cabin where she pulled one of the bunk beds away from the wall and showed me a number of lines that had been carved into the wall. Tallies they thought meant he was tracking each day that passed. I did go back to that job the following summer,
No thanks.
but on the condition I was assigned to a different cabin.
Right? You went
13.
back.
The people in my house.
Oh no.
As I was pulling my car into the driveway
Great.
late one night, my headlights illuminated two people in my living room.
Who?
I owned my home and lived alone.
Oh goodness.
I immediately put the car in reverse and called the cops.
Right.
I waited for them to get in the driveway before I returned.
Right.
I sat out there while they searched the whole house, and they
Good.
couldn't find any trace of anyone breaking in or even being in my house. When I went inside, I saw nothing was out of place. I convinced myself that it had been a long week at work and my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a weird reflection from my lights in the window. That is, until I talked to a neighbor a few days later, and he told me he saw a couple going into my house the evening in question. He
What?
thought I knew them because they seemed to have a key.
Wow.
14. I was his friend. In high school, there was a home on my block that was constantly between occupants. For whatever reason, it just changed hands a lot.
Right.
We joked that perhaps the house was haunted, but my high
Hey,
school
everyone.
self
I'm
wasn't
making a
worried about
super
that
cute
at all.
coaster.
I used to sneak in through an unlocked basement
Here we are
window
so
and hang
far.
out there alone and veg out when I needed space. Frequently, I'd be there alone for a few hours, listening to
on, kid.
music on my headphones. One Saturday afternoon, I was hanging at the empty house, listening to music and staring off into space. I was laying on my back and didn't notice anything weird happening. That's the afternoon I realized I wasn't the only one who liked to hang out at that empty house. When I packed up my stuff a few hours later and went down into the basement to leave via the window, I passed by the door to the room I'd been hanging out in. Someone had etched into the back of the door a crude drawing.
What?
It wasn't well done, but even with my adrenaline going, I could tell it was supposed to be a sketch of me, laying on the floor.
gosh.
My headphones wrapped around my head. Underneath it, scratched into the door,
Oh my god.
was the word friend.
Whoa.
15. A
Whoa.
bad feeling. In 2002, I moved to Los Angeles and was living in my first apartment alone. I didn't have a lot of money, and my neighborhood wasn't that great, but it seemed safe enough, and I was excited to live in a place alone, so I figured I could handle myself. One morning, I got ready for work, grabbed my bag, and went to head out the door, but the door wouldn't open. At first, I thought I'd forgotten the lock was turned, so I double-checked it a few times, but the door was totally stuck. I freaked out, suddenly claustrophobic in the small space, and annoyed that I was going to be late for work. I picked up the phone to call my landlord when I heard gunshots outside. I
Gunshot.
ran to the door and it pulled open smoothly.
Oh my
I
god.
thought better of it and shut and locked it again, waiting for the police to come before I opened it again. Later that day, I found out there had been a shooting directly in front of my building, at exactly the time I would have been walking out the door.
That's crazy, girl.
I wasn't the intended target, obviously. But I think someone was watching out for me,
Good.
making sure I wouldn't get caught up in someone else's violence. 16. Premonition. A few years ago, I sold my car to the uncle of one of my friends, who was a mechanic and frequently bought cars to fix them up again before reselling. I bought a different car from someone else and drove it home and parked it in my driveway. The next morning, I woke up from the most realistic nightmare of my life. In the dream, my husband and I had gotten into my car to drive to work like normal. He drops me off on his way, so we only have to use one vehicle. And we'd gotten in a gruesome car accident that left us both thrown from the car and horribly mangled on the side of the road. I've had bad nightmares before, but nothing remotely like this. I felt like it was a premonition and pleaded with my husband until he agreed to take the day off with me. I've never done anything so dramatic before, but I was that convinced that something was wrong with my new car, and we'd be terribly injured if we drove in it again. Even just sitting at home, I felt so much anxiety, I was nauseous for the whole morning.
I believe it.
My husband got the idea for me to call my friend's uncle, to whom I just sold my previous car, to see if he'd do us a favor and come check it out and confirm that it was safe to drive. I called my friend to see if her uncle was around. She sounded upset, like she hadn't expected it to be me who called.
What?
Instead of asking for her uncle, I asked her why she seemed upset.
Right.
I came to learn that her uncle had just been in a really bad car accident in my old car, where he had been thrown from the vehicle and injured horribly.
She was guilty.
17.
Guilty.
Screams in the dark. I used to live in a very beautiful but very rural community in Appalachia.
Let me
I grew up there, and it felt safe to me. So going on night hikes with my girlfriend was a normal thing. I had a gun back in my truck, but I didn't bring it with me because my only concern was bears, and they weren't around that area.
How do you know?
We'd gone on this hike many nights before when the sky was clear and it wasn't that dark out. But for some reason, we both felt uneasy on this night. I just kept hearing a little voice in my head saying,
you should have brought that gun, little...
When we were about 3/4 of the way to our usual summit, I couldn't take it anymore, and I told her I thought we should turn around.
Yeah, you better.
Later, she would tell me she'd been feeling apprehensive all night, too. She was as eager as I was to get the hell out of there. No sooner had we turned when we heard a blood-curdling scream in the middle of the dark. A second scream broke out in another location. Then a third. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. All around us, we could hear people hidden in the woods only a few feet away from us screaming at the top of their lungs in the dark. We ran out of there as fast as we could, totally full of adrenaline. I scoured the local paper that entire summer looking for anything that would make sense of what we'd experienced.
You're not.
But no one reported anything weird happening in those woods that summer.
Of course not.
18. Last text. The day my mother passed unexpectedly,
Oh, no.
I woke up to a text from her that said, I love you too.
Oh, my God.
It wouldn't be abnormal for me to have texted her, I love you, and she responded with, I love you too. But I hadn't talked to her at all the previous day. I had no memory of texting her recently that I loved her, And my message history confirmed I hadn't sent a text like that. My sister called and told me of her passing before I was able to respond to her. But I like to think that a phantom text from me to her did exist, and that she died shortly after being comforted by a reminder of my love for her.
Aww.
19.
That was sweet.
The man in the window.
Man, y'all should
I
have
used to have a weekly overnight babysitting job for a couple who frequently spent nights in another nearby city caring for one of their ailing parents. It was an easy gig because they only had one kid who was 8 years old and pretty independent. I just played with him for a few hours and got him ready for bed, and then got paid for another 14 hours while I watched TV, raided their fridge, and slept.
Good job.
The one thing I hated about the job, however, was the house. It was a somewhat modern house in the country, and they had big open windows, and the style was such that there weren't any curtains I could close. I just had to watch TV and live with the anxiety of knowing someone outside could be watching me, and I'd have no idea.
That's not good.
One night, I was sitting down in the living room, and I thought I heard a noise, so I turned the volume on the TV down. Sure enough, what I heard was a slight tap, tap, tap. I looked around and didn't see anything out of place, so I assumed it was a noise from a tree or something
Those kids
outside.
gotta come with me.
But every time I turned the volume back up, I heard that same tap, tap, tap.
I'm out.
Finally, I turned the TV off altogether and started walking around the house.
Right.
As my eyes adjusted to the darker room, I saw a man outside the window.
No.
Fingernail pressed to the glass, making that tap, tap, tap noise, and smiling at me.
Oh no.
I freaked out and sprinted upstairs to check on the kid, but the worst part was that there wasn't a phone upstairs. So I eventually had to creep back downstairs to grab a phone and call the police.
No cell phone?
I tried to avoid looking at the window, but I snuck a glance and he was still there, just watching me calmly.
Ugh.
I locked myself and the kid into his bedroom and waited for the police. They never found any trace of someone around the house.
What?
And I suspect they thought I was some kid playing a prank. But I know the person I saw was a full-grown man, and that he just stood there, enjoying the fear he caused me to feel.
Well, girl, you shouldn't have been scared, girl.
20.
Should have came back with a
Unexpected
gun.
company. I went to my mom's house in the middle of the day to pick up a sweater I'd left there a few days earlier. She was at work, but I often popped in to pick up something or leave her some vegetables from my garden for her while she was at work. When I walked in the door, there was an elderly man seated at her breakfast table. He looked up and smiled at me, and I assumed my mother was home for work that day and entertaining a neighbor for breakfast. I smiled politely and said hello, and explained I was just grabbing a sweater. I then walked out the door and sent a text to my mom on my way to work, saying I'm sorry to have missed her and interrupted her breakfast company. She called me back, freaking out because she was at work and had no idea who was in her house. 21. Scratches. I heard a story at a slumber party I was at in high school about an old lady who snuck into your bed and scratched your face or back if you said you didn't want to have kids.
What?
It was a totally cheesy urban legend type thing, but something about being in someone else's house and hearing the story really creeped me out.
Right.
Well, the other girls could tell that it scared me and gave me crap about it. Eventually, they made me say out loud that I never wanted kids, ever.
Stupid.
And this lady couldn't do anything about it. We laughed about it, and I actually wasn't scared when I went to sleep that night because I was surrounded by other girls. I woke up and everything was fine and normal. The next night, however, I woke up in my own bed.
Got
with
her.
4 scratches down my back.
See?
As if they'd come from a single hand.
He's playing.
22. The message in the closet.
What?
In 8th grade, my family moved into a house where another family had lived before. I found out from the kids in the neighborhood that they moved away after the family's 4-year-old daughter was killed in the home in a freak accident.
Why?
The mother was leaving for work and accidentally ran the kid over in the driveway. Everyone felt really bad for them and understood why they moved away right after with their other daughter, who was 13 or so at the time.
Oh my gosh.
I never told anyone, but some nights I swear I could hear a little girl crying somewhere in the house.
That's horrible.
At first, it was so real
Great.
that I wandered around the house
See what I
convinced
did,
that
guys?
somehow a kid had gotten lost and needed help. but I never found any real person making the noises. This went on for years, and I just got used to it. 5 years later, I was leaving for college, and my mom was going to turn my room into a nice guest bedroom where I'd stay when I came home, but she could also use it as an office most of the time. One of my jobs was to strip the entire room of the wallpaper that had been there since before we moved in. I got to a section in the closet and noticed it was patched in with glue, as if it had been stripped away and then hastily replaced. I scratched around the corners until a small section of wallpaper easily came off. Underneath in black ink, someone had written,
Did my dog scare you guys?
"They're going to hurt me too."
She's protective, that's all.
23. My dad's laugh. My dad passed away 9 years ago after he'd been sick for a long time. The last week, my sister, brother, and I were all staying at my parents' house, spending some time with Dad and helping our mom care for him. He always had been so gregarious that the house felt extra quiet with him being sick, even with all of us there. One night, we were all up late. None of us were sleeping well, and ended up playing a game of cards around the kitchen table while Dad slept in his bed upstairs. We're a competitive bunch, and even though it was late and we were all emotionally drained, the game gradually got livelier and livelier. Against all odds, there was even a moment where I was enjoying myself so much I started doing the kind of deep belly laugh we used to do when we were all playing games growing up. The kind where I wanted to stop because I could barely breathe, but I just couldn't. The laugh was contagious, and soon we were all in a fit of laughter. In the midst of this, I heard, very distinctly, my father's loud, booming laugh. I looked up, and it seemed like everyone else had heard it too. Everyone seemed frozen in place, being so familiar with something we haven't heard in months. My mom went to check on Dad, and he was sound asleep. He passed later that week. We've talked about how we all heard that same laugh, and how somehow it meant that our dad was with us, enjoying his family one last time.
24. They weren't really ghosts. I've been into ghosts my entire life. I started seeing them when I was 10, and for the next 10 years, I read everything on the paranormal I could get my hands on. I got involved with the Paranormal Society in my town, made a lot of friends, and went on some investigations. I truly felt lucky that I'd found my place in the world. Unfortunately, when I was 21, I was diagnosed with a debilitating health condition, which sometimes causes hallucinations. I learned that the ghosts I thought I was so good at seeing didn't mean I was a gifted paranormal investigator, just that I had an illness which messed with my mind sometimes.
Damn, girl.
25. I almost found the bodies. In high school, I was at a party thrown by a kid I didn't know very well. I always got a bad vibe from him.
Why did you go?
But he was friends with a lot of my friends, and they all wanted to go. Everything was cool, and I was actually enjoying myself sitting out by a fire and talking with everyone. Until I got cold. I asked everyone if they wanted another drink, and then went inside to grab some beers and hunt around for a blanket I could take out to the fire. I was just about to open up the hall closet when the host came in and started screaming at me about how I was invading his space and being a rude guest.
Wow.
I'd never seen anyone flip out like that. So I just grabbed my stuff and headed home. A few days later, it came out that he had murdered his parents and left the bodies in a closet in their house. He had invited us over to party with his dead parents in the house.
Wow.
It's sick enough on its own. But sometimes I think about what would have happened to me if I had found the closet where his parents were hidden.
You would have had to fight.
And I was separated from my friends, who probably wouldn't immediately notice my absence. 26.
So far, so good.
The edge of the cornfield.
Welcome in.
I grew up on a farm with my family, and it generally felt pretty safe. But occasionally, my mom would send me on chores after dinner when it was already dark. Wandering around near the edge of the cornfield really creeped me out. Even though I knew my parents were right in the house. Chalk it up to having seen Children of the Corn and having an active imagination. I was out there spreading compost for the chickens when, coming from just a few feet away in the cornfield, I heard a man's whistle. I sprinted back into the house where my dad was in there reading the paper, and I told him what I heard. He headed out with a mag light, but didn't see anyone. The next morning, however, there were
Give me
cigarette
1
butts on the
second.
ground
I'm just
near
gonna
the
refill
entrance to the
this.
field.
27. He wasn't the mailman.
Let me show you how good
When I
we
was
are
11, I
looking.
was homesick from school one day. My mom was a single mother and couldn't really afford extra time off. So I convinced her I'd be fine and could just watch cartoons and make myself a sandwich for lunch. I was laying on the couch watching TV in the early afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't supposed to answer it, but the way the house was set up, you could see me laying on the couch from the front yard through a big picture window. I didn't want to be rude, so I walked up to the window and looked out. I couldn't see anyone, but I heard a man over by the front door say, "Mailman, got a package for you." I was a kid, so the idea of getting a package was really exciting to me, and I really wanted to open the door and get it. But I knew I wasn't supposed to and had a bad feeling about it. I decided to go upstairs and look at the front door from my bedroom window, which had a clear view of the area. I looked out and saw a man. He wasn't wearing a mailman uniform. He didn't have a package. I looked out into the street and couldn't see a mail truck either. I stayed locked in my bedroom until my mom came home and went back to school the next day, even though I was still sick. 28. The man in the black turtleneck. My best friend had a party, and a lot of people ended up bringing their own friends, so there were quite a few people there that we didn't know. Everyone had the same reaction as I did, but no one talked to him except my friend who was the host. She said he came up to her and started asking her if she had invited Jesus to live in her heart. My friend is not religious, but is pretty polite and conflict avoidant, so she just said no and then said she had to go help one of her guests. The following day, my friend found a handwritten note in her mailbox, detailing what hell is going to feel like for her. There were descriptions of the skin being pulled off her face and her limbs being cut off and tossed into piles for dogs to eat. We assumed the guy in the black turtleneck put it there, but we didn't have any proof. All of us asked around to everyone we knew who had been at the party, and a lot of people remember him and how creepy he was, but no one actually knew who he was or how he got invited.
29. The blue truck. One day, my dad was late picking me up from school, so I decided to walk home. It was a long walk, which is why I didn't normally do it, but I figured he'd find me on the way and drive us home from there. After a little while, I noticed I'd seen the same blue truck going by me a bunch of times, and it was going slower than usual too. This freaked me out a bit, as my parents had recently had a big talk with me about safety, and I was convinced pretty much all strangers wanted to kidnap me. I ended up cutting across a neighbor's house and watching the truck go by before running home. I told my parents about it, and they were proud of me for listening so well. In retrospect, I don't think they believed anything bad had been about to happen at the time. But it was a really big deal when a kid in my town was kidnapped a few weeks later. It was years before they found the body, and a few more before they caught the guy who did it. He drove a blue truck.
Oh my god.
30. He didn't answer the door. When I was a kid, my mom wanted me to go to the elderly couple that lived next door and see if we could borrow a few eggs from them, so she didn't have to go to the store.
I have chickens.
I knocked on the door and they didn't answer, but I could see the old man standing in the living room. I knocked louder and he didn't turn around. I thought maybe he just couldn't hear me, being old and all. So I turned the doorknob and it was unlocked. I walked in, calling out for him. It was so strange to me that he wouldn't turn around, until I got in the living room and saw that he wasn't standing at all. He had hung himself.
Oh my
And I've been
god.
trying to get the attention of a hanging corpse for the last 10 minutes. 31. It followed me home.
What?
I'm an avid hiker. One summer, I had a goal to hike in every state park within a 100-mile drive of my home. It took me to some pretty off-the-beaten-path places, and some trails that weren't often hiked on. On one particular hike, I stumbled across the body of a man who had obviously committed suicide. It was a horrible experience that I thought would end when I immediately returned and alerted the park rangers about what I saw. But for months afterward, I had vivid, lucid nightmares about this man, where he would tell me horribly nasty things.
Why?
The dreams were incredibly realistic and happened every single night. He wanted me to kill myself.
What?
He was trying to goad me into it. He told me I didn't deserve to live.
That's
He
not
told me
right.
my wife and children were ashamed of me and would be relieved if I were to die.
Not true.
It got to the point where I was really losing my mind.
Wow.
I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. I was just physically and mentally exhausted. At that point, I would try anything. So I went to a psychic
Okay.
who told me the spirit had attached itself to me and I needed to cleanse it.
Okay, what happened?
She sent me to a witch who burned some things in a bowl and made sure the smoke went all over my body. I didn't really believe in this stuff, but again, I was desperate.
Okay.
The night after that was the first night I got real sleep in months.
Wow.
The man hasn't been back since, but I'm still uneasy. I can't believe that stuff like this really happens. I wouldn't believe it if it didn't happen to me. 32. The kind of boy I'm going to murder. I was on a late night bike ride around my quiet suburban neighborhood one night when I couldn't sleep. After riding up a long, steep hill,
Okay.
I stepped off for a moment to catch my breath and enjoy the night air. What I didn't notice right away is that I stopped about 10 feet from a sleeping, homeless-looking man who at first blended in with the shrubbery in the dark. He stirred and looked at me for a moment. I gave him a polite smile and started to get on my bike when he said, "You look like the kind of boy I'm going to murder." He said it matter-of-factly and then put his head back down and went to sleep. I got on my bike and pedaled pretty quickly out of there and back to my house. I don't go on late-night bike rides anymore.
I love late night bike rides.
33. There's a witch in the house. I had a dream once where I looked in the mirror and my reflection spoke to me calmly and said, "You need to wake up. There's a witch in the house." I woke up and looked over at my wife who had blood all over her face.
What?
I shook her awake and turned on the light and asked her what happened.
Right.
I thought she had a bloody nose or something.
Oh my
But after
God.
we cleaned some of the blood off, we found a cut on her forehead that ended up requiring stitches. We looked all over the bed for something that might have cut her, but we never found anything sharp or out of place.
Wow.
Whatever caused it didn't even wake her up. 34.
She said she didn't want kids. You
In
heard
high
that
school,
legend.
my parents went away weekends a lot because they were renovating my grandfather's old lake home into a cabin that the whole family could use. They'd usually leave on Friday afternoon and not return until Sunday afternoon. We lived in a smallish suburb, so I guess word got around. One weekend, my mom was sick, so they decided to stay in town for the weekend. But because we parked our cars in the garage, anyone could probably assume they were gone, like normal. That Friday night, I fell asleep watching TV in the living room. I was on a couch that was very clearly visible from a sliding glass door on our deck, which had stairs down to our backyard. Basically, if you really wanted to, you could walk up and look directly into our house and see me, since I was illuminated by the light of the TV. I woke up suddenly and saw a man standing on the deck making the shh signal with his finger on his
Beaten
lips.
up.
I did not shh. I screamed my lungs out, and my dad came running down the hall to see what was going
So
on.
he didn't beat up.
I
Okay.
pointed at the deck door, and my dad saw the guy too and
Did he beat him
sprinted
up?
toward the door.
Yeah, he
But
said
in
we
the
beat
time
him.
it took him to open the door and get outside, the guy had a lead and took off, and my dad couldn't catch him. I
Man.
don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I do know I was very nearly alone in that house, where no one would have noticed something was amiss for several days.
Wow. That's ridiculous.
35.
I need to notice.
Pictures of me.
Pictures?
A friend of mine worked at Walgreens in high school in the photo department.
Nice.
One day he cornered me at school and told me he had something weird to ask me.
Great.
He asked if I was a part of an art project or something because at work he had recently developed an entire roll of photos of me that were taken in different locations, and all of them seemed as if I was unaware that someone was photographing me.
Great.
I obviously freaked out, as I didn't know anything about these photos, and I couldn't think of anyone who would do such a creepy thing. I told my parents, and since I was a minor, the police ended up getting involved. Unfortunately, the name the person who dropped off the film used was John Smith, and they never actually came and collected the developed photos. So there was no real way to figure out who had done this. I just had to move on and go about my life for the next few years, knowing that someone could be watching me at any moment. There could be other rolls of film dedicated to me that this guy had taken somewhere else, and I'd have no clue. 36. Blood Dreams. One night my friends and I were bored, so we decided to play with a Ouija board. We were all joking around, as neither of us believed in that kind of stuff, but the board kept spelling out, "You're all dead."
Oh,
I assumed
no.
some people in the room were colluding or something to scare us all. Their plan worked, because I was pretty creeped out by the time I went home. The next morning I woke up and looked at my hands, which were covered in blood.
What?
I ran to the bathroom and saw my face was also covered in blood. I started screaming until my mom came in the bathroom and asked me what was wrong. It confused me that she wasn't horrified at all the blood, so I looked in the mirror and it was gone. I don't think I was dreaming it. I've never sleepwalked or had an experience like that before or since. I think whatever was talking to us through the board was making me see something that wasn't there.
That's insane.
37. A cabin at night. I was at a friend's cabin up north with a big group of girls one weekend.
Oh, Minnesota,
We went
that's
to a local
famous.
bar and happened to meet a group of guys who were staying in a cabin on the same lake,
Sounds
about
like
7
Minnesota.
cabins down from where we were. That's quite a distance, because each cabin is set up somewhat privately in its own bunch of woods, but it's not too far to walk if
Minnesota.
you're patient. Late that night, the group at our cabin was settling down to go to bed, and one of the other girls and I were wide awake. We decided to wander down to the guys' cabin to see if anyone was still partying. The quickest path to their cabin was to walk through the shallow water along the lake's beach, hopping up occasionally on other people's docks, and past the parts inhabited by cabins. All went well, and we met up with the other group and ended up hanging out for a few more hours. The walk home got scary, as we'd sobered up a bit by then and were aware of how dark everything towards the lakeshore was, how illuminated we were by the
Minnesota.
moonlight on the water, and how conspicuous we were, making noise even as we tried to wade quietly through the knee-length water. We were about halfway home when we walked up on one particular beach to go around a dock. This cabin looked large, and it was completely dark. We had no idea if anyone was inhabiting the place for the weekend or not. As we stepped onto their beach, we heard a series of loud bangs, which sounded as if someone was banging their fist on a door.
So guess what?
We froze, unsure if someone in the house had spotted us and were angry that we were trespassing. And then the banging happened again, louder this time. We started to run through the water faster because we knew we were making a lot of noise at this point and just wanted to get home. The whole time we were running home, we kept hearing that banging coming from the dark cabin. We got home and went inside and locked all the doors, hoping whoever was so angry hadn't followed us there. A while later, I learned that we may have been witnesses to a burglary or home invasion. One tactic people will use is to bang on the door for a while to make sure no one is home before entering. If they would have looked out toward the water, they would have found even easier prey.
Make sure
than
you click
whoever may have
the
been locked
cart
inside
right
that
here.
home.
This little promo that's on the screen
38
to see everything that I have
is
available
captive
in the
audience.
shop. Right now, we're working on a
I
cute
sat
sparkly
next to a guy
coaster.
on a plane
This is
who
the
calmly
coaster
told
from
me the
last
story
night.
of
This
how
is going to be
he
a
killed his
set.
girlfriend and why he
They're
would
just
never
so
be caught.
precious.
It was a 3-hour flight, and I couldn't
I hope
alert
you're
the
enjoying the
stewardess or even
stories.
act like I thought his story was insane. The flight was full, and whatever happened, I was too close to him to risk him freaking out. Worse yet, no one else seemed to notice the topic of conversation because he was speaking in a low tone and as calmly as if he was discussing the weather. After the plane descended and we were finally leaving, he turned to me and said, "Thanks for listening. That's the reason I love planes. Always have a captive audience." It's so creepy to think that not only did he trap me into this terrifying conversation, but it's something he does regularly, something he enjoys. 39. Scratches on the window. I was house sitting for my parents while they were away and fell asleep on the couch in the living room. The couch is directly under a large picture window, and you can't see the couch from the outside, but you'd have a clear view of the rest of the room, including the entryway by the front door and the staircase up to the bedrooms.
Spilling.
I woke up in the middle of the night to someone tapping on the glass.
No, no, no.
I tried to convince myself that it was a bird or a branch or an animal, but the noise sounded deliberate and human.
Girl.
I couldn't sit up and see what was making the noise, because if it was a person,
Right.
we'd be face to face, and I was too chicken.
What?
So I just sat there for hours, frozen in fear, listening to
I'm
this
not
tapping
that
noise
scary.
go on and on.
Yeah, I'm gonna look and
I
beat
dozed
you
off
up.
again after what felt like a few hours, and woke up in the late morning. I felt relieved and assumed all of the fear was just my imagination going
Okay,
wild.
I feel you.
Until I took a close look at the window.
What happened, girl?
There were small scratches down the middle of the pane,
It was a
about
boogeyman.
eye level, that formed a group of tally marks. I had no idea what they were intended to mean, but they had definitely been done by a human,
Okay.
and they hadn't been there the day before.
Wow. That's pretty
40.
spooky.
The nightmare that saved my life.
What happened, boy?
My girlfriend and I were driving on a rural road late at night on the way home from a music festival.
Okay.
She had just remarked that the scene was like something out of a horror movie.
Great.
When there was a big thunk, and we ran
Jeepers
over something.
creepers.
I thought it was probably a raccoon. A few miles later, my low oil light popped on, and I realized whatever we ran over had probably scratched a hole in the oil pan. We pulled over, and I called my brother and asked him to come get us and tow us home. It was the middle of the night, and an hour or so away from him, but he's family, so he said he'd be there as soon as he could.
Mm-hmm.
My girlfriend and I sat in the car in the dark. We had to roll the windows down because
promise
it was
I wasn't
summer
a
and we couldn't
ghost, you
turn the
guys,
car on
sorry.
to use the AC. It was creepy as hell sitting there in the pitch dark with the windows open. I just felt so vulnerable to anything that might be out there. I dozed off and had a super vivid nightmare that there was a crowd of people around the car banging on every surface and telling us to leave.
Oh
I
no.
woke up suddenly and checked the time on my phone. My brother would only be 20 minutes away, probably. Still, the dream scared me enough that I turned on my car and rolled the windows up. I didn't want to risk moving it, but I felt safer with him up, and I stayed awake to keep guard. A while later, my brother called me as I saw some headlights rolling up. He told me not to get out of the car because he just came upon a car that he thought was ours at first, a few minutes back. The driver and passenger doors were open and no one was inside, but he saw some blood. He ended
Blood.
up running into his truck and just abandoning our car for the night
Blood.
instead of taking the time to hook it up in the dark. On the way to his house, we called the cops and told them about the suspiciously abandoned car,
Okay, what happened?
as well as informing
What the
them
cops
that we
do?
left ours on
Gnashing.
the road for safety reasons and would be back for it the next day. We never got a call back
See?
about what happened to those people or why there were two cars forced to pull over in
Yes,
such a
see?
short space on a rural road. But I get a sick feeling in my stomach every time I think about whether we might have been a slightly more difficult target than the other car,
That's scary.
because I had the instinct to roll our windows up.
You were smart, man.
41. The outgoing call. When my wife and I first got married, I worked nights, which left her alone in our rented house.
Don't
in a
leave your
crummy
wife
part of
alone
town.
ever.
It wasn't ideal,
Take it
but
from a
it paid
married
better than
woman.
the other shifts, and we were trying to save money to start our lives together.
Nope.
One night, I was at work and on a break when I got a call from my wife. It
Mm-hmm.
was 1 in the morning, so I already knew something was wrong. And she wouldn't speak on the phone. She was just sobbing uncontrollably.
Go
The
home.
call ended, and subsequent calls to her phone weren't answered, so I drove home frantically to see what was going on.
You better.
I parked in the driveway and ran upstairs,
Okay.
noticing on the way that the power was off in the house.
Somebody
because
got
none
you.
of the lights would turn on.
Ah.
When I got to the bedroom, I found my wife asleep in bed.
Are you kidding me?
I woke her up, and she had no recollection of calling me, and said she had gone to sleep like normal.
What?
We checked her phone, and there was indeed an outgoing call to me.
Okay.
but her phone was plugged in on the dresser, out of her reach from bed.
Okay.
After I calmed down and we laughed about how weird the situation was, I began to investigate why the power was off in the house.
Right.
Finally, I went how weird the situation was. I began to investigate why the power was off in the house.
Right.
Finally, I went how weird the situation was. I began to investigate why the power was off in the house.
Right.
Finally, I went how weird the situation was. I began to investigate why the power was off in the house.
Right.
Finally, I went to...
Call your husbands,
Hitchhiking.
girls.
I know it's incredibly stupid, but I used to hitchhike home from the bar when I was younger. I didn't have a lot of
Stupid.
money for taxis,
She said it.
so I just trusted random
Stupid
people
is
I'd
right.
meet on the street to
Stupid.
drop me about 10 blocks down the road from where the bars were, so I wouldn't have to walk in heels.
Mm-mm.
I tried to stick to young people who looked like me because I thought they would be the safest. One night, I get in a car with a young couple who were pretty extroverted and asking me a bunch of questions about my life, what I did that night, etc. Everything was going well until I realized they drove past my block.
See?
I told them they passed my street and they could just stop at the next corner and I'd walk back. They didn't stop.
Nope.
At this point, I started really freaking out
You
because I made
shoulda.
myself pretend to be calm and kept joking with them. They kept their happy front on and started talking about this party I should come to with them, as if I had a choice. I agreed and waited until we were at a stoplight and flipped the lock button up and hopped out of the car.
Right.
I could hear them freaking out, but luckily there were some other cars around, so they didn't do anything but peel out and drive away when the light turned green. I don't know where they were taking me, or why they didn't drop me off.
You never
The
hitchhiked
whole thing
again.
was a lot more sinister than our joking conversation led on.
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lesson that night, and haven't hitchhiked since.
I know that's right. You better not.
43.
It's crazy.
Missing time. My girlfriend and I were taking a night walk around a lake in our town. There's a paved
Minnesota.
path and there are lights, so it's not deep in the woods or anything.
Minnesota.
We left the house at 9:45 p.m., and while we were walking, we saw an owl in a tree. I remember we thought it was strange, and we had a conversation about it, and then continued to walk like normal. We take this walk at least a few times a week. It's 3 miles from leaving our house to the path, around the lake, and back home. It usually takes less than an hour. When we got home, I remember feeling a bit more tired than normal and looked at the clock to find out it was nearly 4 a.m. We started freaking out because there's no way we had just left home and walked for over 6 hours.
What?
We opened up our laptop, checked our phones, turned on the TV,
That's
but all the
crazy.
clocks said the same thing. It was indeed 4 a.m.
Whoa.
We sat up talking, trying to think of anything that could account for this missing time, but every explanation we thought of seemed more implausible than the last one. Finally, we fell asleep and woke up in the afternoon feeling exhausted, drained, and sore. We both had flu-like symptoms that lasted the next few days. I've done endless searches on the internet trying to figure out if anyone has lost time in a similar way or in a similar place. And the only thing I've found is that a lot of people remember seeing owls right before an event like this.
Owls ain't good. Owls are not good.
44.
Stay away
He
from
probably
owls.
thought I was alone.
Stay away from them.
My family has a cabin up north that's outside of a small town.
Me too.
It's on a lake where there aren't a lot of
Minnesota.
other properties, and the roads go from gravel to just dirt.
Minnesota.
No one goes on that last stretch unless you specifically
I'm
know
on
where
the
my
last
family's
stretch.
cabin is, because there's nothing else in that area.
I am.
Well, one weekend I had to work at my retail job until close on Friday.
So you
But
were
I
at
really
my
wanted
place?
to go up and enjoy the rest of the weekend with my family.
Okay.
So I set out late, knowing I wouldn't get there until about 3 a.m. At the end of driving on the 2-lane highway to this small town,
Minnesota.
I noticed a large truck with KC lights had been following me for some time, but I didn't think
Be
much of it.
careful.
I just figured that they were going to the same small town. However, when I passed the town and turned onto the gravel road, they continued following me, which started to freak me out.
Mm-hmm.
I was alone, out of cell range, in the middle of nowhere, and if something happened, my family wouldn't notice I hadn't made it until morning. As I started approaching the turn I'd have to make from the gravel road to the dirt one,
Make sure you click the
started
little cart
questioning
in
what
the
I
live
if
you'll be
this
able to
person
see
was
all the
following
things that I have available
Turning
in my
onto
shop.
dirt road would
Right
show
now,
them
we're
where
working
we
on
lived.
a sparkly coaster
But
that goes with the
continuing on
sparkly
gravel
coaster
road
set.
would just take us further out into nothingness.
So cute.
Finally, I decided that going to the cabin was the best bet because at least there were other people.
Wonderful.
As I approached,
This is the
I
one we
started
made last
flashing
night.
my high beams and honking my horn. The lights in the cabin turned on, and I saw my dad step out onto the front porch. I pulled up as far as I could and ran into the house. The truck sat there for a minute with the lights aimed directly at us before it reversed back down the road. My dad and I spent a sleepless night in the living room, watching and listening for any sign of someone coming back. 45. I've been waiting for you. I was installing one of those voice typing programs into my grandparents' computer so that they could send emails and use the internet without having to type with their hands, which neither of them could do well. I had turned the microphone on to capture what I was saying and test the software out, but I was also messing around with my phone waiting for it to load when I noticed it had registered a voice command even though I hadn't said anything yet. I watched in horror as the words appeared on the screen, prompted by something I couldn't hear. I've been waiting for you. 46. The abduction that could have been. When I was a little kid, I was at a local park playing baseball with my older brother. We had to go home when the street lights turned on, but we were being slow that day and it had started to get dark already. As we collected our stuff and started to walk home, I noticed a van had pulled up and the windows were down. The path we were supposed to take home went right next to where the van had pulled up, but I got a bad feeling from it. The guys inside were being rowdy, and I heard them talking in Spanish about getting one of those kids. Not a lot of people in this area speak Spanish, but my brother and I were raised bilingual, so we looked at each other and booked it into the woods the other way. They weren't prepared to chase us on foot, so we didn't really see them after that, but we sprinted all the way home. To this day, I thank my mom for teaching us Spanish. I don't know what would have happened if we had gotten closer to that van.
Oh my gosh.
47. Cabinets. Against my better judgment, I played on the Ouija board with a friend one night when he brought the board over to my house.
Not a good idea.
Nothing too scary happened that night, though I had a really bad feeling the whole time we were playing. The next afternoon, I had my family over, and it was a nice day, so we were grilling outside and eating at a picnic table I have in the backyard. After we all sit down, I realized I forgot to bring out the salt and pepper shakers.
Make
So
sure
I
you
go
click the
back
cart
inside
in
and
the
freeze.
live on
Every
the live
single
stream
one
to
of
see
the
everything that I have
20+
available in the
cabinets,
shop.
cupboards, and drawers I have in my kitchen.
And make
We're
sure you
wide
follow us because every day
Every
in
person who
October
was
we'll have
over
a
was
spooky
outside and
story
accounted for.
and a cute
No
coaster
one had
set
been in
being
the house
made.
since I brought out pitchers of water about 10 minutes earlier. Luckily, nothing creepy has happened in my house since then, but I consider it a warning to never mess with a Ouija board again.
Yeah, don't do that.
48. Sleep talking. My ex-husband and I were nearing the end of our marriage and were fighting every day. The fights were pretty bad, and I could tell we weren't headed to a great place, but I was in denial about needing to leave him. One night I woke up and he was sleepwalking, which he did occasionally. He was standing at the foot of our bed staring at me, and I kept saying his name, trying to get him to wake up. Finally, he walked back over and got back in bed, but I could tell he was still asleep. As he got under the covers, he put his head back on the pillow and said, "You're not going to be here anymore."
What?
There was something about his unconscious words and actions that deeply unsettled me. It was more threatening than descriptive. I stayed up all night feeling creeped out by what had happened, and in the morning I took some of my stuff and moved in with my sister while we started the process of divorcing and moving on with our lives.
Wow.
Years later, I heard the tragic news that he had killed his girlfriend one night. By following the case, I found out that he told the police that he had been sleepwalking at the time, but he was eventually convicted anyway. 49. I see you. In college, I worked at our campus library, and I'd often be the one to shut it down at midnight, where I'd have to go around and clear work tables of anything students had left behind, and leave any books that needed to be put away stacked neatly on a cart for the morning workers. It was pretty creepy being in there alone at night, but in a way, I still felt pretty safe since the campus was enclosed, and you had to go through a security checkpoint to get in after dusk. One night, I was there alone, shutting everything down, and I just had a creepy feeling that someone was watching me. I knew I was alone because before anyone is left alone, whoever else is working at night locks the doors and does a check to make sure no stragglers are still in the building. Then the closer cleans up and locks the door again from the outside. Well, this night, everywhere I went, I kept looking around. I was sure that someone was in there, following me around. Finally, I finished everything up and I went to clock out when I noticed one of the staff computers near the front door was lit up, as if someone had used it recently. I went over and looked at the monitor and saw a Word document pulled up that followed through everything that I'd been doing since my coworker had left earlier that night. It read something like, 12 o'clock, alone, I see you. 12:05, group study rooms, I see you. 12:07, stacks, I see you. 12:11, media center, I see you. 12:15, reference tables, I see you. The scariest part was that I looked over at the door and it was still locked, meaning whoever had typed this was still in the library with me. I left my stuff where it was and left immediately, locking the door from the outside. By the time I got to another building and got campus security and went back to the library, the door was unlocked again, and whoever was in there had left. 50. What the cameras caught. My first job out of college involved traveling a few times a year to different cities to check out venues my company would potentially host events at. It was intimidating to be in charge of something so big and to be traveling to strange cities by myself for the first time, but it was also very fun and exciting. On one trip, I went to St. Louis, and my researching skills were apparently not good because the hotel I looked up that I thought looked really nice ended up being in a bad part of town. I didn't want to switch hotels because I'd have to explain
Pictures
to my
in
employer
hotels
what I
are
did
not
wrong.
factual.
So I decided to just suck it up. Well, the last day I was supposed to be there, I noticed a guy following me. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but I'd gone to 4 different places that day and seen him at every one. Finally, I went back to the hotel and noticed that he was sitting out front. At this point, I started freaking out and decided not to go back to my room. I went to the front desk and asked if there was a place I could speak to the manager privately. I was escorted to a back room where I told the manager what was going on, and they called the police. The manager was able to get surveillance footage of the day, and you could actually see this guy watching me and later following me out the door. The manager went a few days back in the footage and saw this happen multiple times. We showed the police, and the guy was brought in. I'm super lucky that this all went down the way it did because when they got a DNA sample, they matched it to a string of sex crimes in the area.
Whoa.
51. My grandmother's necklace. My favorite grandmother left me a necklace when she passed away. It wasn't expensive jewelry, just a simple gold chain with a cross pendant that she had worn and
That's
reminded me
cute.
of her. I wore it every day and loved having something from my family, so I was very careful with it. When I took it off, I made a rule to always put it back in my jewelry box so it wouldn't get lost.
Right.
One day, I couldn't find the necklace. I tore my entire apartment apart looking for it. I looked behind every dresser, in my pillowcases, underneath my mattress, every crevice I could think of. I was so sad, but finally admitted it was probably lost forever. A few years later, I was going through a really hard time in life. I'd always struggled with depression, and after I lost a job and a relationship, it was the worst it's ever been. There were a few days when I lay in bed and thought about just ending it all. One night, my thoughts wandered to my grandmother, and I started speaking out loud to her and asked her to pray for me and help me get through this time. What she would have called a dark night of the soul. I got up from bed to take a shower and wash the tears away. When I came back into my room, I got into bed, and as I moved the comforter, I saw something fall to the floor. It was my grandmother's gold necklace. I have no idea how it was lost for so long, but I took its return as a sign from her that things were going to be okay eventually.
52. He found me in my dreams.
Oh, that sounds like
I was on vacation with my family when I was a kid. We didn't have a lot of money, so it was just a rinky-dink family campground a state over with a cool pool/play area.
What's up?
My brothers and sisters and I would run around all day while our parents mostly vegged out at the campsite. On our last morning there, I woke up with scratches and bruises all over my body. I was kind of freaked out, but my parents figured we'd just been careless while we had been on the playground and running around the woods the day before. Even though I was the only one cut up, I shrugged it off until my brothers and I decided we want to go for one last swim. We went to the pool, and as we let ourselves in the little gated area, I saw a big old man with long gray hair and a cross tattoo on his forehead. He was staring at me, but I tried to ignore him until I made eye contact with him, and he told me, "I found you in your dreams last night, boy."
Oh no.
My brothers heard him and were creeped out too, so we all decided to go back to our parents. The guy didn't make trouble, and I never saw him again. But I still wonder if he was somehow responsible for the marks I'd accumulated the night before.
Oh heck no.
53. The eyeball. Unfortunately, a severe form of mental illness runs in my family, and I grew up visiting a few different relatives in psychiatric wards. I know it doesn't sound like a place for a kid. It always scared the shit out of me, but it's family, and my dad would always lecture me about how lonely these people were and how they needed to be reminded of family and people who loved them. One day, I was tagging along behind my dad when a resident I didn't know shuffled up to me and held out their hand as if they had a gift for me. I thought maybe they were going to give me a piece of candy, so I opened my hand up. They dropped a human eyeball into it. I found out later they had gouged it out of their roommate's face while they slept, and no one had noticed yet. Dad never brought me to the psych ward again. 54. Robbie. I have a brother who is 3 years younger than me. When I was 11, he had an imaginary friend, Robbie. The way his imaginary friend worked was that he was real, and my brother did everything with him and talked about him as if he was any normal kid he was hanging out with. If you questioned him or referred to Robbie as imaginary, my brother would get red in the face and become very angry, saying that Robbie was real and that they were going to be friends forever. I remember after a few months, my parents suddenly got very strict about Robbie. They told my brother he wasn't allowed to play with Robbie anymore, and that if Robbie came around, he was to tell him to leave. This didn't go over well, and it was a volatile few months while my brother was punished for mentioning Robbie, and was very angry with my parents for taking his friend away. But eventually, the whole thing faded into the background. It wasn't until I had kids of my own that I learned the truth about Robbie. I was joking with my parents about how my kids might get an imaginary best friend, when they looked at each other with a weird facial expression. After a little prodding, I discovered the real reason they made Robbie go away was that they found out a little boy had previously died in the house. His name had been Robbie.
Oh my gosh, you're a psychic.
55. Speaking a foreign language saved our lives. In college, I was in a study abroad program in East Asia. I went on a weekend trip to another city with friends I made in the program, and we had the time of our lives exploring and practicing our language skills with the locals. We went clubbing one night and piled into a taxi late at night to go back to our hotel room. Being students and passionate about the area we were traveling in, we knew the layout of the city, and it became clear the taxi was not taking us to the hotel, but away from city limits. My most assertive friend questioned the taxi driver in the local language about where we were going. He looked at us all in the rearview mirror for a good minute before he did a U-turn and took us back the way of the hotel. I don't know where he intended to take us, but I do know that speaking a foreign language probably saved our lives. 56. No one did anything. I was working on an international business degree, and I hadn't started learning any foreign languages yet, but the perfect opportunity for me to do an overseas internship fell into my lap, and I had to jump at it. It was incredibly frustrating to be dropped in a foreign country and have to make my way around without being super familiar with the local customs or knowing the language, so my job afforded me a native counterpart who was working on his English, and he served as a translator for me in a lot of situations. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with me all the time, and one weekend I was feeling brave, so I ventured off for a shopping trip by myself. As I began walking, I noticed a group of men was following me. They started talking to me in a language I didn't understand. I don't think it was local. And it escalated to them screaming at me. I ducked inside a large department store thinking that they'd never be so brazen in public, but it only got worse. The men continued to follow and harass me, while the people around me laughed instead of telling them to go away. It was a total feeling of powerlessness, as if the men could do anything and no one would stop them. Eventually, as I sat there and sobbed, the men left. I pretended to peruse items for over an hour just so I could be sure they were really gone before I left, and hid in my apartment for the rest of the weekend. 57. It wasn't him. When I was in high school,
Alright, you everyone. So we are completed with the second sparkly coaster that's going to be part of the spooky sparkly coaster set. This is a bubbly cauldron. Super bedazzly, super cute. And then yesterday we did a spooky house, and they're both so sparkly. Tomorrow we'll have some more stories and another cute design that will be made. The design that will be made tomorrow is this cute spooky ghost. So make sure you are following CupCutie on TikTok, also on Instagram, so you don't miss out. I will also make sure the event is present, so if you want to add so you have a reminder, you can. Make sure you hit the cart right here inside of this live stream. You'll be able to see all of the beautiful eco-friendly glasses that are available. They are sets with high quality vinyl. The vinyl is super high quality, so you can put them in the dishwasher. I personally recommend that you hand wash them, but I've put all of my CupCuties I've put all of my CupCuties in the dishwasher multiple times, and they have not bubbled, cracked, or peeled. But that hand washing is definitely better. Right now, all of the CupCuties are on sale. They're $14 and some change. You can also get an additional $5 off. I do want to mention that this is the best sale of the year. This is the best time to get a CupCutie. These are the best prices of all of the cutie glasses ever created. Because other people make cups with vinyl, but CupCuties have high quality vinyl. And not only that, right now we have the best sale that's going on right now in shop. You get the bamboo lid, the glass straw, and the glass. If you ordered a glass tonight, it'll be shipped out Monday morning, nice and early. You do receive tracking on that, and it is wrapped with love. This coaster set that I'm working on now, it will be available as soon as it's done if you would like it. I have so many more coaster sets that we are going to be making with CupCutie. But, you know, with those glass cups, you definitely need a coaster on any table that you put those glasses on. So make sure you follow CupCutie so you can be the first one to get this super cute, sparkly, spooky set. Tonight's came out really nice. I took my time, and you know what? Tonight's stories were also really good. Like, I really enjoyed all of the spooky stories. Let me know how you guys felt. Send me a message, let me know. But we're gonna call it a night tonight. Make sure you follow CupCutie because we have so many cute things always in stock and we ship very fast. Make sure you're also following us because these super cute coaster sets. This first one is really special because as you can see, like how much labor goes into making these. It's a lot of work. And I do it on live for a reason because I want you guys to really have the moment to enjoy creating something beautiful because we kind of do it together when you're watching. Even though you're not physically putting the beautiful sparkles on, it's satisfying to watch if you're into it. So you're kind of making it as well. It's almost like being a passenger princess in a sense. Anyways, these sets will be available as soon as we're done making them. Make sure you follow CupCutie. And like I said, right now I have the best deal going on with these glass sets. You get the reusable straw, bamboo lid, and the vinyl that I put on whatever CupCutie you choose is high quality so it won't bubble or pill. I'll be back tomorrow with another cute, spooky, sparkly set coaster that we need to make. It's gonna say spooky. And thank you for watching. See you next time. It's gonna take me a